All right, we are back with another update and forecast on the Gifford fire, and quite a change in the last 24 hours. If you remember, 24 hours ago, we had that huge column of smoke coming up. There's some talk about some spot fires, and there was a lot of smoke coming off on that, what you could see from the satellite imagery. If you look at it right now, though, you can barely even see where the fire is. It looks like there's still a little smoke in that area. You can kind of see the burn scar. But I'd say this is one of the biggest changes over a 24-hour span that I've ever seen in the 5 years that I've been forecasting wildfire. So we'll get into why that is. But first, just where this fire is. We zoom on into San Luis Obispo. As I always say, go Cal Poly. And then about 17 miles to the east of San Luis Obispo. That's where the fire has been active recently, on this northwestern side near Pozo. And then much of the rest of the fire, we've barely seen any activity. We'll look at the fire progression map in just a moment. But before we get into the acreage or containment or anything like that, first thing you'll notice is a lot of these evacuation updates are good news. Evacuation warnings have been lifted. Evacuation order has been reduced to a warning. Whenever you see that on a fire, it is great news right there. And then the operational update, his tone throughout this entire video is pretty positive. And when we get to the current situation, we understand why. So yesterday I actually did 2 videos. The first one, they seemed pretty confident in their operational update, and we knew that there was going to be some firing operations going on. So I was, somewhat positive throughout my video. But then I went to Twitter after my video and I saw people talking about spot fires. We saw that huge column of smoke, and I actually deleted that old video, went back live, and then tried to provide a little bit more nuance to the forecast. And if you want to see what it looked like yesterday, you can check out my video from yesterday. And it was a lot of smoke coming off it. But here we finally get the information that we're looking for, because yesterday we still didn't know, all right, this huge column of smoke, is that one of the spot fires that's going out of control? Or is this the firing operation where they're clearing the fuels out on purpose to try to help contain this thing, fighting fire with fire? And we have our answer. Yesterday, the large column of smoke was due to a strategic firing operation. Good progress was made in the area where Caldwell Trout Creek intersects with High Mountain Road. The fire's progression largely remained within the constructed containment lines. Some spot fires were observed, but were contained using contingency lines established in the Santa Lucia wilderness. That was something we talked about, where they have so many resources on this fire, and they were preparing this northwestern corner for multiple days in advance, that we knew that they had some good lines in there, and especially some good protections around our communities in this area. These efforts were supported by water dropping helicopters. We saw a lot of that aircraft yesterday. So that is good news. Some of the updates on these evacuations are good news. With that being said, always stay updated with the official evacuation orders and warnings. I never go over those because by the time people are watching this, those can change. And I mean, it is California. A lot can change, and we will look in the weather forecast. There is some tricky part that could create some increased fire danger in the future. But overall, I would say this is going to be a good news kind of forecast. So acreage, 133,000. We'll just average it or round it off right there. Here's our fire progression map for the day. The blue is where the fire started on August 1st. And as you get more into the yellow, orange, and red, that is where the growth was recently. So clearly, the northwestern side of this fire has really been the only part of this fire that we've seen activity in the last 4 or 5 days. And that's why I always take that acreage burn number with a grain of salt, because, I mean, that number could be going up, but if you're down in Cuyama on the southern side of the fire and you haven't seen fire in a week, then even though the acreage number is going up and it's now 130,000, it sounds like things are getting worse. Down in the south, we've barely seen any fire in the last 4 or 5 days. So it helps a lot more to actually know where is the fire active, and then given the weather forecast, where are we expecting it to move in the future? And that's the main thing that we try to do here at Wildfire Insider. So we did have some growth. You see that little red on the very kind of northwestern corner right there. but not nearly as much as what we could have had given what we were thinking about with that huge smoke plume yesterday. And then containment, that rose as well. That rose to 41%. Basically, the entire bottom half of this fire is now contained. That's where you see the black line, pretty much the entire eastern side where you bump into the Madre fire is contained. They had predicted that they were going to kind of button up that last little red spot down here on this southeastern finger. Looks like they got that done. So we're looking great on the majority of this fire. The big question mark is still that northwestern side. So the first thing that we can do is just check out how active it is right now, and also kind of identify why that northwestern side has been the biggest concern. One, that's where the fire's been recently. Two, it's also near a decent number of structures. You see High Mountain Road right here. You have that cluster of structures, and that's why we were a little worried yesterday. We had a lot of red showing up on this map, showing activity, and we had a northwesterly wind. So that would try to push the fire down here. But as we saw on this watch duty report, where they're talking about how it was, yes, yesterday the large column of smoke was due to a strategic firing operation. What they're actually doing was coming in here and they burn out the fuels to the south of the fire. So then by the time that actual fire gets there, the fuels have already been cleared out. Call it like a catcher's mitt. And it looks like it worked, which is amazing considering how challenging the conditions are in this area. Yesterday, I think the weather station we looked at was 97 degrees, relative humidity 14%, and there was 18-mile-per-hour wind gusts in an area with very steep, rugged terrain. That fire likes to go up steep hills, and then also fuels that haven't burned in decades. So it is incredible, not only that this fire didn't grow more yesterday, but how their firing operations worked. And what's, I would say, the most incredible is when I turn on the heat detections, we're seeing very little heat in the last 12 hours. So it looks like they made some great progress overnight. So just to kind of explain this, here's our fire perimeter. Here we have Pozo up towards the north. We have High Mountain Road down here to the south. Those orange dots represent the structures. And then zooming out, these stars will represent where the fire has been active recently. And we actually have a legend for this. So yellow is 24 to 36 hours old, where satellites were picking up heat. Orange is 12 to 24 hours old. Red is going to be heat coming off of the fire in the last 12 hours. And if you look at it, it's only that little tiny bit right there where we're showing heat in the last 12 hours, which is incredible considering how much heat we had coming off of this fire yesterday. It just shows that most of that heat yesterday was due to the firing operation. It was under control. And when I look at the most recent satellite data, this is the one that always overestimates the fire. I usually don't even keep it on the screen all that long because it overestimates it so much. Barely anything at this point. You see those little yellow and orange boxes that popped on right there? That's the smallest amount of heat that I've seen on this fire in maybe since I started covering this fire. And it looks like what heat we do have is within the fire perimeter. Yesterday we had red boxes all over this northwestern side right here, so we didn't really know how much the fire had grown at that point. So that's just some terrific news. And before I was going to get right into the weather forecast where there's overall good news, but one little part that could cause some area for concern. But before I get there, I do want to do some measuring. So we have Lopez Lake to, let's go to where the most recent heat was shown, 7 miles. That's a pretty good amount of distance. And then from Santa Margarita to where we have some of that heat, it's about 9 miles. So looking pretty decent in those locations, especially compared to kind of what this was looking like yesterday. Looking at High Mountain Road, let's just go back to the fire perimeter. It explains why they were so, you could say, aggressive with those firing operations, because if they hadn't done it, this fire would have had a possibility of just coming down, taking out these structures. But looks like those firing operations were successful, and now that distance about 2 miles away. So this one was cut pretty close, but it looks like things are going pretty well. Then if we kind of zoom in here, looks like things are also going very well on this northern side. That's where we do have some structures up there. Those are quite close. Last time we measured those, they were actually within a mile. That one's 2,000 feet away from the fire perimeter. But I listened to the operational update, and they said that it's holding to the south of Avanalis Ranch Road. That he even used the term mopping up in this area. Whenever you hear that on a fire, it's great news. That means there's just some smoldering, and they're just going in there, kind of getting all those little smoldering areas out. And then it looks like it's held to the south of the Salinas River as well. So seems that they use that as a line, and it is working successfully. And then some of the lines that they had in this area are working successfully as well. So now let's get into the weather forecast, because this is where, again, I said good news and bad news. It's already good news today, and it makes sense why we're seeing a lot less activity on this fire today is because we did have some improvement in the weather. Remember, yesterday was 97. Today's max temperature, 87. Minimum relative humidity yesterday, 14%. The reason that's important is the drier the air is, the drier the fuels are going to be, the moisture just gets sucked out of it, and then it's easier for the fire to spread. It's easier for those spot fires to happen like we saw yesterday. Today, minimum relative humidity, 28%. Not that bad. And then max gust, 14 miles per hour. That's an improvement as well. So much better weather conditions today. So that might go along or help explain why when we go to all satellites, not nearly as much heat coming off of this fire right now. And then it'd be worth knowing, all right, what's the weather forecast going to be like going forward? Because throughout this fire, it seemed like every time we checked the forecast, it was up. It's just going to be getting hotter and drier over the next few days. Well, today we had about a 10-degree cool down from yesterday. We got a lot more moisture in the air. And tomorrow, it actually looks like it's going to get even cooler. And then that cool down is continuing, or the cool conditions will continue through Saturday, through Sunday. Looks like Monday it's going to start to warm back up again into Tuesday, but not nearly as hot as we were the last couple of days. So they're going to have a solid 3 days here with some favorable conditions in terms of temperature and humidity, because as temperatures go down, your humidity is going to go up. More moisture. Hot air can hold a lot more moisture, so when your air heats up, it expands, and it's almost like having a large sponge with the same amount of water, so then that sponge is going to be drier. But then when things cool down, it's like you're squeezing that sponge, so that water seems to be taking up more of the sponge. That's all to say more moisture in the atmosphere over the next, or higher relative humidity over the next few days will help bring maybe a little more moisture into the fuels, which will help them control this fire. The question mark, though, and maybe the one part of the forecast that isn't totally perfect, is what's going on with winds. So we'll just start off with the synopsis. Temperatures will cool after tonight, causing humidities to rise into this weekend. Great news. Periods of gustier winds, mainly Thursday night and Friday, may bring elevated fire weather conditions. So that's tonight and Friday night. They're expecting windier conditions, and that's what it says in the forecast as well. Dry conditions continue as temperatures cool into this weekend. Humidities will rise to less critical levels as a result. There is a chance of gustier winds, particularly on the northwest side of the fire, Thursday night. Additionally, ridgetop winds on Friday look to also be a bit breezier out of the northwest. So temperature, humidity, good news. Winds, maybe not as good of news. So when it comes to winds, they mentioned overnight hours. During the overnight hours, your winds like to go downhill. The reason for that is during the afternoons, you heat up down here, that air becomes less dense, and then it rushes up the slope. The opposite happens at night. Your air cools down, it becomes more dense, and then it goes down the slope because it's almost like that more dense air just wants to filter down to those lower elevations. That leads to downslope winds, and we have seen that lead to a few nights on this fire where we had almost more growth overnight than what we were having at the peak of the afternoon. So my question would be, on this fire, where the edge of the fire is it close to where we have some areas going downhill? It looks like it is in this area. And then if we zoom out, let's try to reorient ourselves a little bit. That looks like it's somewhat downhill. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell because there's so much variation in this terrain that overall it almost looks like it's going uphill, but then you have little pockets like right here where those northwesterly, northeasterly winds overnight would try to push this fire down that mountain slope right there. But I mean, based on what's happening on this fire right now, the lack of activity, how many resources we have on it, the fact that the afternoons aren't going to be nearly as hot or dry, it seems like this is overall some good news that we're looking at. And just speaking of the resources, we've got 5,000 personnel, 30 helicopters, 381 engines, 155 dozers. So if we're talking about these winds coming tonight and tomorrow night, then you know that they're deploying all of these resources as well as they possibly can to prepare for that, which is what they did yesterday, and it seems that they were successful. So huge shout out to everybody working on this fire, doing the hard work in extremely challenging conditions. And I'll definitely be doing an update again tomorrow just to see what happens with the winds that we're expecting overnight tonight. But overall, I'd say we couldn't have asked for much more than what we're seeing right now. So hopefully this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.